First question, looking back at the popular media figure that we shared on week 1, mine was Forrest Gump, and then how it is represented of like typical characterizations of high incidence disabilities based on the information in chapter 6. The disability I was given was intellectual disability. I don't think that Forrest was the best representation of an intellectual disability when you compare it to the book, because the book does talk about a lot. The book talks about how people with intellectual disabilities usually have trouble with problem solving, they have problem with memory, they have problems with abstract thinking and like reasoning and judgment. However, I don't think Forrest really struggled with those things. I think what he did struggle with was learning from experiences. Like, he would just keep going back to Jenny, and even after she was like, no, Forrest, I don't want you, whatever, he still continued to go back. That's what he struggled with, was like learning from experiences like that. For question 2, comparing and contrasting figure 1, some of the similarities I see are visual impairment and hearing impairment are the same at 1, and then other health impairments and autism spectrum disorder are the same at 7. Some of the differences I noticed, intellectual disability is 1 higher than hearing impairment as well as visual impairment. And then I noticed that other health impairments and autism spectrum disorder take the lead pretty significantly by about 5 when compared to intellectual disabilities. And then it'd be like 6 when compared to visual impairment and hearing impairment. This tells us, I personally don't think that disabilities are portrayed very well in the media. I think it's definitely gotten better in the last, I'd say, 5 to 10 years, just because I think our society is becoming more educated and more understanding and willing to accept these disabilities instead of trying to make these people seem like they're different or less than because they have these disabilities. So I think the media is doing a better job of representation for these disabilities. And then I think that in schools and society, I think we are getting better in the schools especially. Like, I think we're doing better at finding tools and strategies that work well for students with these disabilities, as well as in society. I think we're finding, like, I know in Richmond, for example, there's a coffee shop that hires people with disabilities to come in there and work, and I think that's becoming more and more popular, as having businesses ran by people with disabilities. For question 3, how has your understanding of your assigned disability category changed since week 1, and what academic or behavioral needs of the character you chose did you not consider? What might you need to do as a teacher to ensure that the individual receives an inclusive education? My understanding of the disability has definitely grown. At the beginning, I really didn't know much about intellectual disabilities, but after reading the chapters and learning more about Forrest Gump, I've really gotten a better understanding of what an intellectual disability is, and how it's not the different that you would think it would be. And then academic and behavioral needs that I think Forrest could have used would definitely be being pulled out for small groups and like having things explained to him a little extra, because at first, like, the principal wasn't even going to let him enter the school, because back then it wasn't required that children with disabilities had to go to school. But the mother ended up sleeping with the principal so that Forrest got the education that he needed. However, it could have been much better if he was pulled for small groups or had extra time on tests or things like that. And then behavioral, I would say Forrest struggled with his self-esteem. Like, he wasn't very confident in himself. He didn't set goals and try to accomplish them. The things that happened to him kind of just happened to him out of, like, I would say luck, but it wasn't, he never really set out to play football in college or anything like that. It kind of just all happened by chance. But I think if he would have had the support, the emotional support and the educational support, he could have excelled tremendously. Question 4, the other high incidence disability category that I'm choosing to compare and contrast to Forrest or intellectual disabilities is developmental delays. I think Forrest also had developmental delays, just because his legs were in braces. He couldn't walk for a while, unless he had braces, and when he did walk, it was very hard for him to do so. He also had intellectual delays. At first, he had trouble like having conversations with people, things like that. And then also in chapter 6, for the social and behavioral needs, students with gross motor developmental delays need physical therapy. We can see that Forrest went to physical therapy for his legs. However, in the movie, when Forrest had braces, he ends up getting chased by a bunch of bullies, and he just starts running one day, and he never stops, and he has full use of his legs. However, I think most of the time, children with developmental delays that do have problems with their legs that have to wear braces, I think they'll struggle with that for a very long time in their life and have to do physical therapy over their entire life. However, Forrest was that one-off chance, like I said. And that's how I think they differ a little bit, is Forrest overcame those delays very quickly instead of taking years of therapy and physical therapy to get to where he needs to be. I think that's what makes him a little different than people with developmental delays.